So every religious culture has some sort of theistic aspect associated with it. And even if it is not necessarily God, it is still some kind of a supernatural aspect.
What is scientific realism and why you yourself called as scientific anti-realist?
Yes, correct. So
Can we say that like science till this date, science is the best way to know the truth? Can we say this?
for philosophy is the mother of all branches of human endeavor.
I have this question with any vegan, right? Because I'm not, so I don't understand this. But so for vegan, are they allowed to kill mosquitoes? Why people are so much obsessed to prove that religious texts are scientific one? Because
Mhm.
I don't think this makes sense at all.
I have one habit that anyone can follow it. I read at least 10 pages before going to bed. Like every night, I read one
Oh,
book, but at least 10 pages of any book. It can be any book. So if you follow this habit, like within a month, you have read 300 pages. So that's like reading one book in 1 month.
yeah,
So
problem
that's
with that
yeah,
is like, yeah, that's the best thing to do. But again, the
yeah.
problem with that is like to grasp the philosophy thing, even
Mm.
in 10 pages, it's too hard, right? So that's the
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Yeah.
Hello everyone. In this episode of Let's Talk, I invited Mr. Bhargav Joshi, who is a PhD student in aerospace engineering at the University of California, Davis, and he is also the teaching assistant in the Department of Religious Study. So, in this episode, we talked about philosophy of science, philosophy of religion, definition of different terminology like agnostic Hindu, agnosticism, atheist, atheism. These all things we covered. Here is the full episode. So, first of all, thank you so much for coming. And I like a few months ago, like I start to like watch your post and everything, and then I realize, okay, there's something to learn and something like that. So then I keep, checking your post, and the
Mm-hmm.
like best thing about your post is like they are so much well referenced. uh,
Mm-hmm.
like as being myself as a academic person, so that's very like attractive and fascinating as well, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that one aspect I really like. And like I've watched your debate with Bimo as well, so that was
Okay.
also interesting one. And
Mm-hmm.
like after following, I think Norman Nomeda, his name, I
Mm-hmm.
forget his name, but after
Yeah,
following him,
Zahim.
like
Yeah.
lots of like that kind of post keep bombarding by Instagram, and then uh, I also like follow you. And then one of very famous Nepali celebrity, she's very famous here. She's also
Sahana. Sahana Vajracharya.
yeah. So she
Yeah.
also followed you. So she's
Yeah, yeah.
very quite famous, and she used to host a very good show. And then later
Mhm.
on, she also do travel vlogs and everything. So yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen that, and yeah, that was a good one. So first of all, I really wanna start this conversation with few terminology. Like I get confused, and lots of time people debate over that stance itself, right? So not a content, but
Mm-hmm.
that is stance. For example, few terminology like uh, agnostic Hindu. You yourself called as agnostic Hindu, right? Uh, there is also a stance like agnostic atheist, and there is also simply atheist and religious and agnostic. So my question is like people debate over that stance alone. Like some people call like agnostic Hindu is oxymoron. It can't be
Mm-hmm.
stance, right? And some people also call like atheist agnostic, it can't be like a position. So please clarify me like how I can understand this one.
Yeah, definitely. So, if you want definitions for these things, so I can give definitions for all of them. But the first thing to clear that is with the word agnostic Hindu. It's not like a conjunction कि दोनों एक साथ है. The point is, the word Hindu itself is not very well defined at all. The etymology of the word Hindu, it comes from the Persian word, because Persians, yeah, the ancient people from Iran, they used to call the people living beyond Sindhu River as Hindus. So that's where the word comes from, Hindu. So the word Hindu is not present in any Rigved, Yajurved, Samved, Atharvaved. any of the Indic literature, the word Hindu is not present at all. So Hindu is more like an ethno-cultural identity. So that is what the word Hindu is. So if you're living in India and you subscribe to at least one cultural tradition that originated in the Indian subcontinent, then you would be a Hindu in that case. So that is what the word Hindu would mean. Even as per the Constitution of India, the word Hindu doesn't really have a proper definition as such. So in that case, Hindu is not at all related to theism or atheism or agnosticism. Hindu is a complete separate term that talks about an identity, like Jewish, Egyptian, American, Russian. So in the same case, we have Hindu. So that's why it wouldn't be an oxymoron or a contradiction to say that with agnostic. Now, definitely some Hindus are religious. Like, for example, you might have seen people, even in Nepal, there are some Hindus who are religious who follow the Vedic deities. So, yeah, definitely they are the theistic Hindus. But being a Hindu does not necessarily make you a theist. That's the point, because Hindu as a whole is a cultural identity. It is not at all, a position related to, theism or atheism or agnosticism. So that's why I cleared the air around the word Hindu first.
Yeah. No, if I have to be a devil advocate here, like, so for example, Hindu, if someone calls themselves as a Hindu, they may refer it as like theistic, like point
Hmm.
of view, right? So in that case, it will be oxymoron, or maybe
Yeah, correct.
like fit together, right?
Right, correct. So, for example, if we consider the Constitution considers Buddhists, Jains, Sikhs, and Vedic Hindus as Hindus. They consider all of them as Hindus. So, in that case, a Buddhist or a Jain, they don't believe in the existence of a creator as such. So, in that case, if you are talking about Hindu with respect to Buddhist and Jains, then they are not theists. But Vedic Hindus, they would be theists. But even in Vedic Hindus, there are some darshanas. For example, there are six schools of Hindu philosophy, Vedic philosophy. So one of those six schools is Purva Mimamsa. So Purva Mimamsa people believe in the Ved as authoritative, but they don't believe in a personal God or a creator or an Ishvara. So they are technically not theists in the classical sense, but they are still Hindu because they believe in the authority of the Ved. So they are not theists per se, like the people who worship idols, yeah, for the people who do pujas, or the people who believe that there is some personal God watching over me. So Purva Mimamsa people would not believe in that. So same is the case with Samkhya. So Samkhya people also would reject the idea of a personal God or a creator as such. So in that case, Sankhya would still be Astic, and they are Hindus, but they are not theists in that case. So it wouldn't be an oxymoron.
Yeah, but so the thing is like word meaning can be changed over the time, right? So maybe the word Hindu, like not entirely, but almost it changed, like it
Yeah.
refers to like religion, right? So in that case, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. So even the word Hindu itself, initially it meant an ethno-geographical identity or an ethno-cultural identity for all the people living in the Indian subcontinent. So they were considered Hindus. But later, when Islamic or the Britishers came in, colonialism or Islamic invasions, so there were clearly distinct eschatologies over there. Eschatology, in the sense that there were two different types of religion present in the Indian subcontinent. We had the dharmic religions, which believed in the concept of rebirth, samsara, dharma, karma, and then we had the Abrahamic religions, which believed in the concept of a one true God, and only their book is the correct book. And so there was a conflict between these two religions because Hinduism or Buddhism or Jainism don't have like one book. They have multiple books. Jainism and Buddhism have founder, but Hinduism doesn't even have a founder. Vedic Hinduism. Ved are considered to be the authoritative books, but there's four of them. And then there's exegesis, mimamsa of these books. There were Brahmanas to talk about the interpretation of these books related to the rituals. So since this conflict began, since that time, the word Hindu came to be associated with religion per se. But before that, it wasn't really associated with religion as such. It was just an ethno-cultural identity. And that is also how the Persians or the Iranians understood us. Okay.
So what about agnostic atheist? There's also another
Yeah,
stance, right? Yeah.
yeah. So the reason why that is problematic is because the word atheist and the word agnostic have a certain definition that is
Mhm.
considered in philosophy, academic philosophy.
Mhm.
And that position comes with certain, you can say, propositions. So, for example, I'll give you the academic definitions for the three positions.
Yeah.
Theism. So, in academia, theism is defined as the belief that there is at least one God, or to be more particular, the belief that God exists. This is called theism. Atheism, then, is a negation of that belief. Now, in academic philosophy, negation implies that you are saying the proposition above is false. That is how you're negating it. So, in that case, atheism is defined as the belief that there are no gods, or more particularly, God does not exist. That is atheism. And the third is agnosticism. So, agnostics are the people who neither believe God exists nor do they believe God does not exist. So, they suspend judgment
So
on
both are
either of the
beliefs,
propositions.
right? Both are beliefs.
Yeah, atheism and theism both are beliefs. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
And the third one is suspending judgment. I suspend the judgment on the proposition God exists or God does not exist. I don't believe either of them. So that's called agnosticism. And all three of these, in academic philosophy, they are called doxastic attitudes. Doxastic means belief, and attitude is what attitude you have towards a particular proposition. Do you believe it? Do you disbelieve it? Or do you suspend belief? So if the proposition in question is God exists and you say you believe it, in that case you're a theist. If you say you disbelieve it, then you are an atheist, which means you believe the proposition is false. And if you suspend belief, in that case you are an agnostic. So these are the three positions.
Yeah,
Now
so
they cannot inter. Yeah, sorry.
no, no, you continue.
Yeah. So they cannot overlap because agnostic means you are suspending belief, and atheism means you are believing or disbelieving. You're believing some proposition, and agnosticism is you're suspending belief. So you cannot believe the negation of that proposition and suspend belief in that proposition. So they cannot be together at the same time.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that creates a
yeah,
contradiction.
yeah. So that makes sense. Yeah, completely.
Mhm.
But again, that's the thing, right? Because like you lay out the point with like academically and then formally, right? But I
Mhm.
don't think like people will think in that way, right? Because in the colloquial term, like people use this throw this term, but like they are
Yeah.
not thinking about the academic way of looking at it, right? So maybe that's the confusion here.
Yeah, yeah. So the way to deal with that is, let's say you meet a person, like you are having a conversation with a lay person who does not understand academic philosophy. And if the person, let's say, is considering himself or herself as an atheist, then what you can do is ask them the question: do you believe the proposition God exists? If they're an atheist, they would say, no, I don't believe it, which is fine. Okay. Now you should dig deeper and ask them the second question as well, which people don't ever ask. The second question is, do you believe the proposition God does not exist? Now, to this, if they say no, in that case, they neither believe God exists nor do they believe God does not exist. So they are suspending judgment from both the propositions. So, truly speaking, they are agnostics. Whereas if they say, yes, I believe God does not exist, in that case, they are truly atheists. So it is always important to ask both the questions. Do you believe God exists? And do you believe God does not exist? If the answer to both is no, then they are agnostics. If the answer to first is yes, then you are a theist. If the answer to second is yes, then you are an atheist. If you answer yes to both, that's a contradiction. You cannot do that. So yeah,
Yeah, suspending like just belief and then again, yeah, yeah, that
yeah.
makes sense. That makes sense. So, like, if someone has to call themselves religious person, then what kind of fulfillment they have to like fulfill? Is there anything like to
Yeah,
formally
yeah.
we can define them?
Um, yes, correct. So, for example, for every religious person, let's say um, the word religion also is understood in different ways. So, for example, in religious studies, there are three ways in which we approach the origin of religion, or three ways in which we define the religion. The first is called the sociological approach. Religion is a sociological construct. So, that was given by Emile Durkheim. He's considered to be the father of sociology as a discipline. So he gave the first definition of religion as a sociological construct. So that is the first definition. The second is a psychological construct. So a definition using psychological approach. So that was given by Sigmund Freud. He's again considered to be a revolutionary, sometimes a founder of psychology, but not really, because he had some weird
I
property
think
issues.
he gets disregarded like
Yeah,
many times, right? Because I
yeah,
don't know. Yeah.
yeah. And the third one is the intellectual approach, which considers religion with closer to anthropological understanding. How religions have evolved, what is the origin of religion, what are the rituals, traditions, practices. So that is the intellectual approach. And that was given by Bruce Lincoln. So there are these three approaches in defining religion. So the reason why it is complex to define a religion is because there are so many religions on the planet,
Yeah.
and not all of them are theistic. Like, for example, if you consider Taoism, which is an Asian indigenous religion, or if you consider Shintoism, for example, from Japan. So Shintoism clearly has their deities, which are called kami. They have shrines dedicated to deities on
Yeah.
top of mountain. Yeah, you might have seen that. Yeah. So the Shintoism is an indigenous Japanese religion, and they worship multiple deities. So it's polytheistic. They have certain rituals. They have purification rituals. Very similar is the case with Vedic religion. We also had multiple deities, and we also have certain rituals and traditions associated with them. If you go in Africa, then we have African indigenous and African diasporic religions. Then we have American religions. So every religious culture has some sort of theistic aspect associated with it. And even if it is not necessarily God, it is still some kind of a supernatural aspect. For example, Buddhism and Jainism. Both of them don't believe in a God. Like they don't consider God to be a necessary thing. But then they still have belief in the concepts like samsara, that we are trapped in this cycle of birth and death. They believe the concept of jiva, which is the soul. Buddhism does not believe in soul, but it believes in anatmana, non-self. But Buddhism has belief in the concept of karma, that karma is responsible for your birth, and it has the concept of rebirth. It believes in that concept. Then Mahayana Buddhism has much more concepts like shunyavad, for example, emptiness of self nature. So these wouldn't be theistic religions, but they are still religions because they have some belief in supernatural aspect. So in one line, to summarize this, if you want to define religion, um, belief in a superhuman order that dictates your ethical norms, that would be a religion. That would make you religious. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, this is like this sounds very like academic and very detailed, right? But again, what I
Yeah.
think is like for me, I don't like worship, right? Like daily rituals also I don't follow because uh,
Hmm.
again I'm here. Like it's been a while, right? But I participate in family function, and if they
Mhm.
like offer me tika, then I will put that, right? Again,
Yeah.
Doxing festival is coming, so we do all those things. But in my day-to-day life, like I may utter some words sometimes, like oh god, like if I be in trouble or
Yeah.
something like that. Other than that, I don't actually use or even remember or even do anything ritual. So again, I'm still figuring out like what I what is my position. But my thinking is like I'm more inclined toward like atheism or maybe agnosticism, right? So, and
Hmm.
lots of my friends also do the same thing, like they don't follow rituals. So,
Hmm.
in that case, like in this modern world, people are more inclined to the uh, agnostic side or maybe atheistic side, right? So that
Yeah.
makes me
So.
question like,
Mhm.
that makes me question like So religious value is like going away, right? In that sense, I think so.
Yeah, so if you consider, actually, there are two major religions in the world, which is Christianity and Islam, and their numbers are going up. Hinduism is also showing an increasing trend if you consider the next 50 years. So the population of Hindus and Christians and Muslims would go up. The
Yeah,
population of yeah,
yeah. Sorry to cut off, but again, that's the thing, right? Even if someone called me and say like, "What is your religion?" I still say like I'm Hindu, but again, in day-to-day practice, it may have like increase or will increase, but again, the person doing rituals and everything, those kind of aspects, they
mm,
will say they are religious person, but they won't follow all those things. Maybe
yeah.
that's the case, right?
Yeah, yeah, correct. Yeah. So if you're religious, you can call yourself, you're not a practitioner, but you still subscribe to the religious, foundation. So that is maybe you are more like a cultural Hindu than you are a practitioner. Like you don't perform rituals and pujas and all the other things. So you don't practice the religion as such, or you stick to its ethical norms or practices, but you're still culturally a Hindu. So yeah, you can also consider that. So some people can be culturally Hindu, like they want to be associated with the culture, the respected traditions, cultures, festivals. Maybe they have some attitude towards the gods as well. Maybe they believe in some aspects of God, but not other aspects of God. So yeah, that's definitely a case for cultural recognition, but that wouldn't make you a practitioner. So yeah, perhaps those people who do all these rituals and everything, they would be considered practitioners. So, or you could say they are proper Orthodox people who,
Mhm.
perform all these rituals.
Yeah, yeah. So that like it this question always bothers me. Like if someone asks me, like I obviously say like I'm Hindu, but then again, I do not practice anything like in day-to-day basis. So
Mm.
maybe that's the thing, right? So
Yeah.
this leads to me to another question. Like there is you often call yourself like scientific anti-realist, right?
Yeah.
Anti-realist. So I want to know like what is scientific realism? I've watched your post, but again, I just want to hear
Mhm.
like in more
Yeah.
simpler language. So, what is scientific realism, and why you yourself call as scientific anti-realist?
Yes, correct. So basically, scientific realism is defined as basically scientific realism goes with the ideas that our best theories provide true or approximately true descriptions of the mind independent um, world itself. So that is scientific realism. Maybe I'll repeat it again. It provides true, our best theories provide true or approximately true descriptions of the mind independent world. And when it says world, it means the observable and unobservable aspects, both. So this is scientific realism. Now, scientific realism has three branches. So one of the branches called metaphysical realism. So metaphysical realism is the idea that science investigates a world that is mind independent. So there exists a world that is mind independent, and science investigates that. So this is metaphysical realism. The second is called semantic realism. So which means the theoretical claims of science are literally true, even about the unobservable aspects. So this is semantic realism. So any claim that science makes, even if it has no evidence, maybe it's simply a mathematical theory like string theory or the theory of multiverse, dark energy, dark matter, all these are theoretical claims right now. But semantic realism means that these claims also provide true description of the unobservable aspects. They should be taken literally. So that is semantic realism. Second. The third one is called epistemological realism. The word epistemology comes with the word knowledge. So, epistemological realism says that science provides, descriptions of reality that constitute knowledge about the world. So that is the third type of realism called
For example,
epistemological realism.
yeah,
Yeah. So, for example, if science makes a claim, let's say about the atomic theory, or let's say about the electron, for instance. So, if science makes a claim about the electron, It means we have actually discovered the true nature of electron. So what we perceive or what we observe for the electron and what we theorize, that is actually how the electron is. So this is called epistemological realism. So in that case, we would have knowledge about the electron. But then that is not the case because we know the nature of electron is still not discovered.
Okay.
So yeah. So these are the three types of realism. Now I am an anti-realist specifically with the last two positions, semantic and epistemological. I reject both of them. I don't think that all the scientific claims constitute knowledge about the world. And I don't think that theoretical claims about unobservable aspects should be taken literally. So, for example, I don't think string theory should be taken literally. It has no empirical evidence. Basically, it talks about higher dimensions. It talks about strings that are fundamentally unobservable as of now. So I wouldn't take the claims of science about unobservable aspects to be literally true. And I don't think all theories of science constitute knowledge of the world. So for the second one, an example is the theory of turbulence. When we sit in the aircraft, what we experience is a turbulence. Yeah. But then the nature of turbulence is still not explored. It has been almost 50 years, I guess. We are not able to give a general solution to Navier-Stokes, and this is directly related to my field. So we still don't even know how flight is actually generated. Like what's the phenomenon? Um, so in that case, I would reject the last two realisms, semantic and epistemological. And since I reject those scientific realisms, I'm a scientific anti-realist. That does not mean anti-science.
Yeah.
In scientific anti-realism, there are some branches as well. For example, constructive empiricism is a branch in scientific anti-realism. So what constructive empiricists believe is that claims of science should be believed when they are talking about observable aspects. For example, biological phenomena or physical phenomena like planets, the revolution of planets, and all those things. But we should maintain an agnostic attitude about anything that's unobservable.
Mm.
So that is constructive empiricism. So a constructive empiricist would never really believe in string theory. They wouldn't really believe in any other theoretical claims of science, which are purely based on theoretical physics. They have no
Observational.
basis, yeah, in observation. Or for example, the claim that black holes have singularity. Black
Mm.
holes must reduce to singularity. This is purely a theoretical claim. There is no empirical evidence for that. So I wouldn't take that claim seriously, even
Mm.
though it's a scientific claim.
Yeah. So can we say that like science till this date, science is the best way to know the truth? Can we say this?
For anything that's observable, yes, yeah, anything that's empirical, science would be the best method to investigate that. But
Mm.
anything that's unobservable, I don't think science is the best method. Because if it's unobservable, it's by default
Mm.
outside the domain of empiricism. We cannot
Mm.
perceive it, like dark energy or dark matter, or for example, higher dimensions. So all these things are, we cannot perceive them. So we don't really know their nature.
Yeah. So, but like even in the case of like unobservable thing, maybe we can like set up I mean, make believe thing, and then we can prove by the mathematics or something like that. So even that in that case as well.
So yeah, so all the theoretical claims right now are purely based on mathematics.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is not the case that, so here's the difference. There is something called a priori and there is something called a posteriori. So a priori truths, for example, are mathematical truths, which we have, basically we have derived it or we have deductively arrived at them. But to know that these deductions actually hold in reality, what you need is empirical evidence. That's why science keeps on stressing on empirical evidence. So you might derive 13 dimensions for your universe in the string theory. But if we can't even find the dimensions higher than three, like spatial dimensions higher than three, there is absolutely no reason to believe that such higher dimensional universe can even exist. So this is simply theoretical, and we have done abstractions over there. like all sorts of mathematical abstractions. So a mathematical proof doesn't necessarily mean it actually exists in reality. So yeah, that's the difference. So that's why mathematical proofs are not considered evidence.
Yeah. So again, a little bit like I want to know about this. I think you have debated to lots of other people as well about this perfect shape in nature, right?
Yeah.
And like I'm a bit confused because you know, like straight line, for example, right? Someone says
Hmm.
like straight line is not there in nature, and I can say that like perfect straight line may not be existed, right? But again, we can draw the line and we can like measure and everything, right? So even you've said like triangle, we can't say perfect like acute triangle maybe in the nature. So but like I've seen some of the video, they said like okay, this can be observable like rain, maybe the straight line or something like that, right? So what is this like,
Oh,
what is this all about?
no, no. So I'll tell you, this is talking about mathematical Platonism. So I'll introduce the idea of what it means. So let's say you might have heard of Thales theorem in school. So
Yeah,
we consider a circle, and in that semicircle, we inscribe a triangle such that one
triangle.
side is the diameter of the circle.
Yeah,
So the angle in front of that side, that would be 90 degrees because it's inscribed in a semicircle. So in this case, what you have derived right now, the question that there emerges a question. What you have derived right now, is it applicable only to the triangle in the figure that you have drawn, or is it applicable to all possible triangles that are inscribed in semicircles? What do you think? Hmm. Like whatever theorem you have derived right now,
yeah,
is
yeah.
it only applicable to this particular triangle which you have drawn in the figure on paper, or is it applicable to all possible triangles which can be inscribed in semicircles?
Maybe all.
Yeah, so the thing is, how do we know? Have we tried inscribe? Have we tried to, how do we know that what we have derived from this particular triangle can apply to all possible triangles? Because we have not observed all possible triangles.
Yeah, uh, be, because we can prove by like we can derive the formula from that particular thing, right? So
Yeah,
which is applicable to every other thing.
exactly. So basically, you're trying here. This is called deduction a priori. Um, to arrive at this formula, you don't need any experience. You don't need any empirical evidence. You don't need to
Yeah,
conduct an
yeah,
experiment. You can purely derive mathematical facts by sitting at your desk. And while deriving it, you realize that, okay, I had no clue about what was actually happening in nature related to these. I can simply arrive it um, by deduction alone. So these are called analytic. Well, mathematics is not really analytic per se, but these are called a priori. Truths that we know independent of sensory experience. You have never actually seen a triangle in nature. You have never actually seen a circle in which a triangle is inscribed and the angle is 90 degrees. All of
yeah,
these
yeah,
are coming from your thought. They don't exist in nature as such. Once you know these patterns, then you try to see these patterns in nature. Like, for example, you think sun is circle when it is not actually. It is more like an oblate
yeah,
spheroid. Yeah.
yeah,
Or Earth is like spherical. It is not. It's like an oblate spheroid. So since you know these shapes that you have arrived at purely from thought, and then you try to apply these shapes into things that you can see. Like for example, this has two parallel lines maybe, because these are the two sides of the mobile. And the mobile is a rectangle, I can say. But then if I zoom into it, I would see that these two sides have certain,
mm,
irregularities, surface
yeah,
area. So it's not exactly a line as such, because line is perfectly straight and it's an infinite collection of points.
yeah. A little bit like I just want to cut off. For example, it can't be it is like other way around. For example, if we see observe like sun or moon, maybe right at night like moon, although it's not like perfect in like circle, but we can see like it's kind of circle, right? Then
Yeah.
but after observing that, maybe scientists or mathematician draw the same thing in their paper and they derive the formula. It can be like that as well, right? Not like by drawing paper and then observing the nature. So maybe
So if you consider Euclid, Euclid was the first guy who wrote an entire treatise on mathematics or geometry as such.
mhm,
So even when Euclid starts deriving these things, he doesn't actually say that I observed this circle or observed this triangle. What he begins with are definitions, and he defines those objects that way. For example, a triangle is defined as, a figure. A triangle is defined as an entity that has three sides and three vertices, and the summation of all angles is 180 degree. So this is how a triangle is defined. A point
Mhm.
in Euclid's geometry is an entity that has zero dimensions. That is a
Mhm.
point. Now, if I tell you,
Yeah.
show me a point, you would draw a point on a piece of paper, and but I would say, well, that is not a point because I can see it.
Yeah.
It has dimensions. So where does the point itself exist if it has zero dimensions? It does not exist in reality. It's an abstraction. It's an entity that exists purely in your thought.
Yeah.
So even Euclid himself, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's what I say. Like that exact thing may not be found in nature,
Mhm.
find in nature, but then maybe the shape like that can be observable, right, in nature. So maybe someone see that and maybe they derive from that as well, right? I can say that for like circle, maybe straight line, we can see like something kind of straight, so maybe we can draw the line and we can derive the formula. So maybe in few cases that can be true, but again, like point dot or something like that may not be true.
Yeah.
I'm a bit confused
Yeah.
here.
Rather, there are many other complex shapes in analytic geometry. Analytic geometry was founded by René Descartes, and
Mhm.
René Descartes was a rationalist. And Descartes believed that we can arrive about the knowledge of the world purely through reason. If we know, like for example, he related that to mathematics. Like in mathematics, we know certain axioms, we know certain definitions. And if we consider these axioms, and go one step after the other, every step following from the first step logically, deductively. And then we see that these ordinary steps, as we follow the deduction, finally lead to some conclusions that are not at all obvious. So, from these very obvious axioms, if we follow deduction, we reach to some unobvious conclusions in mathematics. And he was impressed by this, that simply by deduction and reason alone, you can arrive at some truths that are totally not obvious. Like, for example, theorems in geometry, like we have Pythagoras' theorem, Thales' theorem, Apollonius' theorem. Same goes with algebra and everything else. So he was impressed by that. So he believed that, okay, what if we can do the same thing about, observable reality? What if there are some things that are self-evident, and from those things, we can derive the other truths of nature purely by deduction? And he believed we could do that. So he was a rationalist. So in
Mhm.
analytic geometry, if you consider, there are so many other complex shapes that you don't really actually see anywhere throughout your life.
Yeah.
Like for example, Mobius strip. Now, some people might see a Mobius strip somewhere, but most of the people have never seen a Mobius strip in nature. They don't even know what a Mobius strip is. But that's a shape in analytic geometry or geometry in general. And same goes with numbers itself. So if you consider
Yeah.
simple arithmetic, one, two, three, four, where do these numbers themselves exist? Numbers don't exist. Um,
Yeah.
so what exists are conjunctions and disjunctions, which is
Yeah.
addition, subtraction, division, multiplication. These operations is what we observe, and then we formalize it. But these operations themselves don't exist. Um,
I think it's a I think it's a human invention to make life easy. Maybe that's only
yeah,
the case,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, in that case, so that raises another question in the philosophy of mathematics.
Mhm.
It is called mathematical Platonism in academic philosophy. So, mathematical Platonism is the idea that abstract entities or abstract objects, mathematical objects, actually exist somewhere in nature. They exist in their own realm, perhaps, which is called noumena. Kant called it noumena. So they are not phenomenal, which means they are not something that are grounded in observation that we can touch, see, hear, or taste. But they exist somewhere in other another realm, which is a realm purely of thought and facts and abstract objects. So Plato introduced this idea of this realm which is filled with abstract concrete abstract objects that are true. And so that's why mathematical Platonism is considered to be one of the philosophy of mathematics, that abstract objects exist but not in the phenomenal world. They have another realm where there are only abstract objects, properties, possible worlds, and everything else. So they don't exist in the phenomenal world. So that's mathematical Platonism. On the other hand, there is mathematical realism, which is slightly different. So mathematical realism would say, no, well, abstract entities do exist in our world itself. So some philosophers believe that as well. So yeah, it's always going to be a dispute because we can't really say for sure whether mathematics exists or does not exist in nature.
Yeah, yeah, it's a big question, right? Like how mathematics itself came and like how it is,
Yeah,
how it existed and something like that. Yeah.
yeah.
So moving on, another thing, like I recently saw your post about this meme, I think, uh, philosophy, sorry, science on the back of philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is more interesting because recently I saw this one video with Neil deGrasse Tyson and Cord Jai Mongol, I think his name. So
Oh,
they both are discussing about like philosophy, and deGrasse Tyson was like very, he says philosophy is no use or something like that. Maybe it parted away long back, I think in from the 19th century or something like that. It philosophy and science parted away. Now science all goes to the labs and observe. So it derives the question from there, and it itself solve the problem. So it has nothing to do with philosophy. He was saying that, right? And there is a little bit kind of argument going on. And then I realized you posted that, and I think I have to ask this one. What is this?
yeah.
Like, is this the thing that philosophy and science parted away, or maybe it's not? What is this?
So basically, I would say philosophy is the mother of all branches of human endeavor. Not just science itself, mathematics and logic as well come from philosophy. Ethics comes from philosophy. Epistemology comes from philosophy. Metaphysics comes from philosophy. There's philosophy of mind, philosophy of language. Then we have philosophy of law. So aesthetics, all of this stuff comes from philosophy. And even when Newton wrote his masterpiece, Principia Mathematica, Naturalist Philosophy, so even in there, the title itself is Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, which means natural philosophy and the principles of mathematics. So science is considered to be natural philosophy. It's still philosophy because it pursues things through reason. And in philosophy, I mean, in the Western philosophical tradition, you arrive at conclusions through arguments, and arguments require a logical form. So that is how you perceive things in philosophy, through arguments and reason. So the same method science applies, but the science has additional aspect, which is empiricism, that is verifying those things if they actually exist in reality. Now, scientific claims cannot always be considered absolute because, for example, ethics, that's outside
Yeah,
the domain of
yeah.
science. So if you ask the question, murder is wrong. So there is no scientific evidence for this claim because this claim is outside the domain of empiricism. So this comes under ethics, and ethics comes under philosophy. But even the questions about science themselves, they can be even today. For example, what is evidence? Like yesterday, I had a podcast, so that
Yeah.
is very much related to the science that we do every day. Like if I go to the lab, like I'm an experimentalist, so my research is also experimental. So if I go to the lab and I conduct an experiment, how do I know that the results that I've got, they are actually evidence for my hypothesis?
Mhm.
Like how do I make that link? How do I join the hypothesis to the results, the data that I've got? Data itself is not evidence. When the data gives a good reason to believe the hypothesis, only then the data is evidence. Otherwise, we can get all sorts of data that is just data, but it might be subject to instrumental error, human error, or any other thing, irrelevant information as well. So that wouldn't count as evidence. So even today, science does have, the base of philosophy, epistemology particularly, which is how do we know things? When can something be called as evidence per se? So yeah, it is still rooted in philosophy. It's just that it doesn't address other philosophical questions, like questions related to metaphysics, for example. Do we have a free will? Does God exist? Does soul exist? So these questions science does not address. They are outside the domain of science. So it's not like science has separated. In that case, all other fields have separated as well. Because philosophy of language today has become linguistics. Ethics today has become, it is used in law or any other things. And then we have epistemology, which is partly used in science even today. We have logic, which has entirely become a separate branch. Um, Although it originates from philosophy, today is its separate branch. Like we have modal logic, first order logic, and then we have propositional logic. And these are all classical. So yeah, science is baseline is science is still rooted in philosophy, and science is called natural philosophy. It's not like science has separated from the foundation because science still requires constant addition. So, for example, if you read philosophers of science like Thomas Kuhn, Thomas
I
Kuhn
think
talks about normal science.
Alex Rosenberg, I think he's also,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, he's
Yeah,
also written, right? Yeah.
yes, perfect. And then we have Karl Popper who talks about falsification. So these were all philosophers who talked about philosophy of science because even science as a discipline evolved as a philosophical discipline. It was natural philosophy, and later it fused with engineering, or how we can apply science or applied sciences, what we call them. That is engineering. So engineering itself is now separated a lot from physics. It uses physics, but for an engineer, all the models that we use in physics are not really that useful, because an engineer is still rooted in things that he can actually build and construct, and all the other mathematical models that physicists use, they are irrelevant to engineers. So if science separated from philosophy, in that case, engineering is also separated from physics. So that's the same link.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can, like, let me understand this. Okay. Maybe it's just parted ways because some questions are like, it's
Yeah,
irrelevant over the period of time. So maybe
yeah,
it follows different discipline. That may
yeah.
be the case, right? Yeah, that debate was like very interesting, and sometimes I feel like even the scholar, like, he's a very good scholar in terms of, like, I
Hmm.
think physicist, right? He's a physicist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? So scholar like him could have read this all thing, right? Maybe he read, and maybe why those scientists who, like, deny this kind of thing, like philosophy is not with science anymore and something like that, even Dawkins or other. So I get confused. Like, this scholar, like, them, maybe they have read all those things, right? I don't know. Like, it's
Yeah,
confusing.
so actually, Neil deGrasse Tyson has not read this stuff. In fact, Neil deGrasse Tyson also makes errors in history of astronomy. So, for example, if you have seen his episode, he talks about history of mathematics or algebra, for example, numerals. So he says that it was Arabic people or Islamic Golden Age when the numerals were invented. And he cites the example of Al-Khwarizmi and all the other people. He simply doesn't know the basic fact that Al-Khwarizmi itself got his idea of numerals from the Hindu system, and he even wrote an entire treatise on that. And it doesn't look like Neil deGrasse Tyson knows about it, because his discussions that he has, they are purely in the domain of astronomy and astrophysics. But anything apart from that, Neil deGrasse Tyson does not really know. He pretends to know it, but he does not really know it. For example, Neil deGrasse Tyson, even in his field, if you look at his research, he has very insignificant research as compared to the other people in physics community, the people who get Nobel prizes. So Neil deGrasse Tyson has a PhD in astrophysics, but right now he is the head of Hidden Planetarium. So he's more like a science communicator than
Yeah.
he is an actual astrophysicist, because it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't work in a lab or something. It doesn't conduct his own research anymore. He simply communicates with people science. So
But
um,
he called himself like practitioner, maybe. I think even in that podcast also
yeah,
he mentioned that, like, I still practice. I have no idea, but no, it's my, like, commonsensical brain things like that. Okay, this kind of scholar may have read philosophy and they reach out to this conclusion. Anyway, like, we can't jump into their brain, but yeah. But
yeah.
again, this leads to me another question. Like, recently you shared this one article about this science
Mhm.
publishing is a multi-million dollar Ponzi scheme. This is written by
Yeah,
Alex Gomez Marin, right? Theoretical physicist,
yeah.
neuroscientist
It's
from
Yeah, it's
Spain.
from Institute of Art and Ideas.
Yeah. So And I read that article like once, twice, right? And then I realized, okay, he disputed this deGrasse Tyson, maybe Dawkins, and other few other scientists. And I realized, okay, in that particular article as well, he has not mentioned the specific why he dispute these people. I didn't get that one, right? He said like, okay, this there the fund is there, and people also like their fascination to publish in nature is more than to discover new
Yeah,
things. This kind of thing, I
yeah,
understand that. But then again, to dispute Dawkins or other those scientists, he has not mentioned the specific thing, right? And again, I want to know from you, like, why these you call themselves like new atheist or maybe Reddit atheist or modern day
yeah,
atheist, whatever. But why philosopher or more people who incline towards philosophy disputes these people? Is there
yeah.
any specific reason for this?
Yeah, definitely. So what these new atheists are trying to talk about, they are talking about a particular notion which is considered as scientism, which
Oh
is
yeah.
what scientific realism partly is.
Mm.
But scientism itself has become like a new orthodoxy. Like, if something is not scientific, you cannot consider it. Or, for Dawkins, he considers scientific truths as commandments, like divine commandments. So it's very ironic because they try to criticize religion, but then what they're doing with science, that science is the only method that can give us answers. This is
I'm
scientism.
not again. I'm not sure. Like because like in latest podcast like he has done with Chris Williamson, right? And even
Mhm.
before that, like with Piers Morgan and all, I watched that, and even there he said like if he is not sure about anything, he said like, okay, I don't know about this, or I'm not sure of this. If we if host keep dodging him, like if he try to cross the domain of him, then he always refused to answer about that. So I don't exactly think that he tried to pretend like I know everything as well. So
No, no, no. It's not about I know everything. It's about considering science as the only method that's available to us and that can lead us to truth. That's the problem that these new atheists have. Like they consider science itself to be the divine commandments. That's the problem. Like even within scientific claims, they would consider the claims like string theory or anything like that, and they would actually believe it, even though there's no evidence for that. Rather, Roy Kerr, who is a very famous theoretical physicist, in 2023 he published a paper about do black holes have singularity. So this paper is actually a critique of Hawkins and Penrose. Hawkins and Penrose talked about black holes having singularity inside them. 60 years, there is no evidence for this claim. It's simply all mathematical abstractions. But still, physicists believe in that and they advocate for that. And PhD students who are doing theoretical physics right now, they very much pursue this idea, even though it's, by default, unprovable. So in this case, Roy Kerr has made a critique on that. That why are you deliberately trying to push an idea which can't even be proved empirically, like black holes having singularities? So this is itself counterproductive to the scientific method. So yeah, that is the problem. Because they consider the scientific method, um, all the claims that science
so
makes, they would believe in it.
yeah, yeah, I get this. So again, okay, l- like when will science cross and became the dogmatic approach, and when it will remain in like in a scientific, that where we can
Yeah,
draw the line? Because that's the important question here, right? Because
yeah,
yeah, we can say like science becoming a dogmatic
Hmm.
in a way, right? But then what is the line between that? Because we
Yeah,
can say that in general sense as well, right? So
definitely. Yeah. So the line between scientific attitude and scientistic attitude, the line between that is observation. If anything that is grounded in observation and you can observe it, you can test it, you can verify it. In that case, you're following the scientific approach. But anything that is outside this approach, that is unobservable, and you still try to claim truth of that matter, then you're moving towards scientism because you have crossed the line of observation. You're entered into the domain of unobservable entities. So The reason why you have crossed that domain is because when you're talking about something that's unobservable, you cannot claim knowledge about that thing. You cannot claim the truth of the proposition or the falsity.
Yeah.
But still, you're trying to claim that even though you cannot observe it, you cannot empirically prove it, but you still want to push that idea, advocate for that idea, and try to say that this idea is probably true. Even to
Mm.
say that some idea is probably true, you need evidence for that. And if the idea that you're talking about is not rooted in observation, then that would be a scientistic attitude. And saying that science can also be used in ethical claims, for example, like the claims about whether murder is wrong or right, whether rape is wrong or right, whether abortion is wrong or right, science can provide us the answer. So saying that itself would count as scientific because these questions are outside the domain of science. You will never get
Mm.
an evidence for the hypothesis
Yeah.
murder is wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is when you cross the line.
Mm.
Anything that's observational, experimental, empirical, well, not even empirical, anything that's observational and can be experimented upon, measured, that would be scientifically. If you stay within that construct, you are being scientific. When you cross that
Yeah.
construct and try to apply
Mm.
it to unobservable things and try to
Mm.
claim the truth about them, then you have become a scientific person rather than a scientific person.
Mm. So, okay, that means the scientist, if scientists criticizing the religion or some religious belief, or maybe God, like we can't
Mhm.
observe this, so I won't believe this one, right? So in that case, they're like, it is good enough, right? It is good enough
Yeah,
reason for this, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
if scientist is criticizing religion, then it is not like a dogmatic attitude towards the religion or even in general, right?
Yeah.
Am I making sense in that way?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah. So, but the reverse thing is when you start criticizing some things about science, then
Mm.
they are triggered. They don't like that. Like, for example, when you start questioning evolution, evolution is basically, it is falsifiable because it is scientific, but then evolution is not actually observable as such.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
more like an inference that we have drawn from things that we have, collected, data that we collect, fossils that we collect, for example. And from that, we draw an inference that, okay, the skull patterns matches, the cranium size is increasing throughout, and this is earlier than this, and they are related. So therefore, humans have evolved from this to that, and then from other things. But evolution itself as a phenomena is not something that's observable. So
Yeah.
when you start to criticize or question
Mhm.
the claims in evolutionary biology, then Dawkins, for instance, he wouldn't take it lightly. He doesn't want anyone to question evolution as such. In fact, he strongly defends that idea.
Yeah, no, no. Yeah, he defends that. But again, he said like, okay, from science point of view, we can't observe this thing, we can't prove like how evolution happened and
Yeah,
everything. Okay, but you can't claim that religious people or religion or God knows or God created as well,
definitely.
because that's also
Yeah,
can't be true because we can't observe that as
definitely.
well, right? So both
Exactly.
can be true at the same time.
Yeah, so that's why you should be an agnostic. So for example, I'm an agnostic,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I believe that evolution is more likely true than theism. So I'm agnostic about the proposition God exists and God does not exist. So I don't know if God exists is true or God does not exist is true.
Mm.
But clearly, I have more reason to believe evolution because it has more evidence to support its
Yeah,
hypothesis.
yeah.
So I would definitely be, if someone says evolution is false, I would argue with that person. But at the same time, if some scientific person says that, string theory is true, I would argue with that person as well, because we don't have evidence for
Mm.
that either.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would start
Uh,
criticizing, I would start asking them questions
yeah.
that the very method that you are using about observation, what you are saying contradicts that method. It is counter to that method because it is not something that you can observe. And Sabine, I guess, has made an excellent video about it recently. Sabine is a very famous YouTuber. I'm not sure if you know her. Um,
Uh, I
so
I
Sabine,
don't
you
know.
can check her videos. She makes excellent videos on scientific realism, scientific anti-realism, and she says how theoretical physics today is closer to pseudoscience than it is to science, because theoretical physicists keep on creating abstractions based on mathematical things
Mm.
that might not even be rooted in reality. So
Mm.
they are simply pursuing that. Millions of dollars are being spent into funding these physicists. And while all of that, cannot even be used or tested as such.
Yeah.
So yeah, they are not even falsifiable statements in some cases. Like if you talk about multiple dimensions, there's no way to falsify this statement because we don't even observe higher dimensions or something apart from 4D. So how would you falsify this statement? So in that case, theoretical physics is something that's becoming closer to non-science than it is to science. Because science was also always rooted in observation. It was always grounded in experiments, something that you can observe and test and reproduce. Theoretical physics has moved far away from it, and so it has almost become non-scientific.
Because this has been the question, and always like now I became like I get tired when I listen this God existence debate, right? Whenever I see like,
Mhm.
okay, this is useless and pointless at this point, because we are not going in right direction if we are debating like God existence. I think so, because what we are going to do, like, it all always ends up to triggering one another, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that, like someone triggers someone and some religious people get fired and then another person. So what do you think about this, like why people keep doing this? One thing I can understand, because I'm also a YouTuber. I used to be very professional one, but now I am not. But I know that fact, that like, okay, views and everything, that's one fact, right? Other than that, it's a very useless and pointless debate, I think so. Like, what do you think
Yeah,
about?
yeah. So the problem is this very debate between the existence of God. It's not a very new one. It has been there since the history of philosophy, since the history of religion. The reason why this debate continues to persist is because there are billions of people on the planet who believe in some higher power.
Yeah.
And if you try to say that there is no such higher power, then you're basically saying that 3 billion people and their beliefs are irrational. And basically, you're saying that they are stupid to believe in such a thing. So it's about that particular notion that are their beliefs justified or is atheism justified? So the debate is not actually about the existence or the non-existence of God. The debate should be about whether it is justified for a theist to believe what they do, or whether it is justified for an atheist to believe what they do. So the debate should be between which position is more rational, rather than God exists or does not exist. Like which position is more justified, which position can offer more justifications so that people can believe that hypothesis or the other hypothesis. So that's why there are two hypotheses. God exists, and if a theist can provide justifications for why he believes this proposition, and if another person reads this justification and says, "Yeah, this sounds reasonable," and now
I
there is
think
a reasonable thing to believe it.
yeah, I think either of them can't justify their belief in that like particular specific sense, right? Because how
No,
can?
so actually, justification is not related to proof. They cannot prove the proposition, but
Yeah.
they cannot say that the hypothesis is true or false. But what they can provide is reasons for believing in this hypothesis, or reasons for believing that the hypothesis is likely. And there are
Yeah,
definitely good
yeah, yeah,
justifications
yeah.
for it.
For
Yeah,
example, yeah, you have also given that example of, I think, fine-tuning argument or contingency
yeah,
argument and
yeah,
these all things, right? But even
yeah.
like contingency argument again, I think it can be like formalized in a very
Hmm.
believable way, but still it's again, I don't think like it can be conclusive enough to say that yeah, this can prove like God existence. I've watched this one famous debate between Alex Rosenberg and, I think, his name is, I forgot, Daniel Craig. He's like
Oh,
that
Daniel,
Christian apologist.
is it? Oh, William Lane Craig. Yeah,
William Craig. So
yeah,
they debated on that, and it's like 10 or 40, 10, 12 years ago, right? Same argument
yeah,
is keep coming right now as well.
yeah,
Okay. So again, and I saw that, I watched that debate, and then I realized, okay, these all arguments are coming from like people there.
yeah.
But
Philosophy.
we can
Yeah.
say that, right? Let me, so let me be specific. For example, religious people, or even like whatever, in general, people are like, people can have that evil thing inside them, right? So they can use the religion for that, like to just
Yeah,
showcase that their evil side as well, right? And
yeah,
which we can observe in different like area and everything. So in that sense, maybe people think like, okay, religions may destroy people's mind, or may like more, extremist people, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So again, I don't understand, like, if even if they criticize those kind of people, then maybe religious people get triggered on other side, right? So this kind of
No,
thing.
not really. So, for example, to give an example, I think there was a debate between Dawkins and some other person, and I don't remember the other person's name, but the person asked Dawkins, since you give examples of religious extremism, what about people who have done other things that are very horrible, but they are atheists down to the core? For example, Mao and Stalin.
Yeah. Mm.
So, would you say that what they have done is indicative of atheism? Like atheist, being an atheist makes a person do that if you're an extremist.
Yeah, human
So,
being are in general, human being are like evil in
yeah,
nature. They can take like, they, again, you
yeah.
you rightly said, like, I think Mao, or maybe, oh, Lenin, maybe in
I
Russia.
guess yeah, Stalin or Lenin. Yes, one of them was
Yeah.
was an atheist. Yeah.
So I think, by their, like, their political approach, like lots of people died. That's for sure. Like,
Mm.
this debate is in another tangent, but yeah, that's true. But even that, like, being atheist or being religious does not make one kinder or maybe
Yeah.
empathetic person. That's not
Yeah.
true, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, yeah, so there's one case here. For example, there is something called as moral argument for God. So there is the ontological argument, then there is cosmological argument, and the third argument is called moral argument for God's existence.
Yeah.
Like, what are our moral how do we gain moral truths? How do we know moral truths? Like rape
Yeah,
is wrong,
this
murder is
yeah,
wrong. Yeah.
this is also my another question. Like, some people believe, like, morality come from religions, maybe, right? The whole approach, like, we are moral because of religion. Some people completely believe
Mhm.
that, and then others say, like, no, I think, like, religions has nothing to do with the morality also. So this debate also keep going on.
Yeah. Yeah, because basically the idea is that what are our moral truths grounded in? Like when we say murder is wrong or rape is wrong,
Mhm.
um, if you reject the idea that there is a God who keeps a track of it and there is punishment,
Mhm. Yeah.
supernatural idea, in that case, if you reject that, what are our moral propositions grounded in? What is the ground of them? Why do we think they are true? Why should we follow them? So the very idea is that murder is wrong because if you start killing people, we would end our own race. Rape
Yeah.
is wrong if you rape people, then it would create chaos and that
Yeah.
would put our survival at risk. But then in the same moral dictum, we don't see anything wrong in raping animals and killing animals. So, for example, people are okay with people inseminating cows for getting more milk. Insemination is practically the same as rape. And then we are completely okay in slaughtering animals for culinary pleasure.
Mm.
So people don't find anything wrong with that. So that is
Mm.
murder and rape. But then when it comes to humans, that is wrong.
Yeah.
So clearly there is an ethical contradiction here in your moral, whatever your
Mm.
thing is. So in that case, that brings the question that are our moral truths relative or are they objective? If they are not objective, why should anyone believe them? Let's say 50% of the people reject the Constitution of India and reject to follow India's law. And they start creating their own independent army and start revolting against other 50%. In that case, which of them is right? Because you cannot show that
Mm.
murder is wrong is an objective fact. It's more like a relative thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
what are our moral truths grounded in?
Yeah, that's for sure. Like, it's it's a relative thing. Yeah, that's also my
Yeah,
question. But you bring this on. But yeah, morality always relative, and it's kind of, I don't know. Like, it's so much. If we think like that way, and then it gets
yeah.
too difficult to figure out, like, what is this, what is right and wrong, and this is another debate,
Exactly.
right? But
Rather, this is all about moral philosophy. Like moral philosophy has a thing called as meta ethics. Like
mm,
which meta ethical position do you subscribe to? So, for
mm,
example, there are people who are moral realists. So, people who believe that moral truths are objective. They are as true as laws of nature, like empirical, scientific truths. They're as true as that. And there is a dichotomy in moral realism. There is a group of people who say moral truths are natural, just like scientific laws are natural. So they are called ethical naturalists. And then there are other people who say that no, moral truths are more like intuitive. We know them intuitively, just like we know mathematical truths intuitively. We don't find them in nature, but they're still true and they are intuitive. So they are called ethical intuitionists. So both of these are moral realists who believe that moral propositions exist, are real. They are independent of the observer. They are not relative. Then there is a second meta-ethical position called moral relativism. So these people believe that no, moral truths depend upon the attitude of the observer. And there is again a dichotomy here, subjectivism, which says that something is wrong because a particular person disapproves of it. Something is right because the person approves of it. So it is indexed to that particular person. So morality is subjective. So that is subjectivism. The second is cultural relativism, which means a particular thing is wrong because the culture disapproves of it. So, for example, if you go into Islamic countries, killing pig and eating pork is wrong because the culture itself disapproves of it. So that would be morally wrong. So this is cultural relativism. So there is moral realism, there is moral relativism, there are categories inside that. And there is a third thing called as moral nihilism or error theory. Moral nihilism basically says that all moral propositions are false. There is no morality. This is something that we have invented and come up with. Eventually, everything about the world would be revealed by science, and science doesn't need right or wrong. So there is no right and wrong. So there are no moral propositions. All moral propositions are false. So for moral nihilists or error theorists, they say that Hitler was wrong is a false proposition. Rape is wrong is a false proposition, but because there is nothing like right and wrong. The problem with moral nihilism is that they cannot argue why someone shooting them in the head is wrong. So yeah, that's a self-defeating position.
No, again, I think it's keep changing, right? Over the period of time, like it keeps changing, like our morality and our the relevance of morality also keeps changing because uh, that's the thing. Because I think if we see things like that, then I think our ancestor, maybe long back ancestor, all are born out of rape, maybe, right? Because there is no
Mhm.
boundary about consent before. I don't think so. Like
Yeah.
there was a consent or something like that.
Oh,
So,
so animals do have consent. So even in animal kingdom, there is consent. So for example, a male cannot just go ahead and have intercourse with a female, even in the natural world. There is a whole mating ritual that goes on. That the male
mm,
has to convince the female, and if the female is
oh
convinced, then
yeah,
the female chooses. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So there is
No,
consent. Yeah.
there is one beautiful documentary in Netflix, like Our Planet, and there one
Yes,
bird
correct.
thing. I was like so much fascinated by this thing. Like
Yeah,
it has to clean the area and it has to woo that female bird,
perfect.
and yeah, that was crazy. But
Even
again,
peacocks, if you consider, yeah, peacocks have
yeah,
this
peacocks,
dance. Yeah, yeah. So
yeah.
peacocks are by default beautiful, so they are male. Peacocks are male. The hens are not very, attractive. Peacocks, the male are attractive,
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
do a little dance to, impress the female. And then if the female agrees, then they can have an intercourse. So yeah, there's
Yeah,
definitely consent.
yeah,
But about
consent.
morality, like we digress. About morality. So yeah,
Yeah.
if you say morality changes, then that itself is moral relativism. And even considering ethics, there are two types in which ethics itself can be divided, three types actually. But one is called consequentialist and the other is called deontological. So
Mm,
consequentialist basically says that this action would be right or wrong depending on the consequences of this action. Like if I do this action, if the consequences of this action are damaging, then this action is wrong.
mm,
If the consequences of this action are maximizing profits or beneficial, then this action is right. So that's called consequentialism. On the other
mm,
hand, there is deontological ethics. So deontic ethics say that a particular action is right and wrong depending in that particular moment itself. Like something should be right and wrong at this particular instant. You shouldn't care about what consequences it will have. So that's
mm,
deontic ethics, and the second is consequentialist ethics.
mm.
So there are different things here as well. Kant was a
Mm,
deontic, father of deontology.
mm. Yeah. So again, that means like it has a different parts. That means like
Yeah,
it's a contradictory in nature, or sometimes it's confusing
yeah,
perhaps as well, right? Yeah.
mhm,
No, you are vegan, right? Vegan.
yeah,
You're vegan. Vegan means you can't. drink milk as well? Maybe.
Not dairy, but oat milk, almond milk, so that is fine because
Oh,
that's not
yeah.
obtained from it.
Yeah. So I have always this question. I'm just curious. I'm not being like that disrespectful, but I have this question with any vegan, right? Because I'm not, so I don't understand this. But so for vegan, are they allowed to kill mosquitoes? I mean,
Yeah, so veganism is not about not killing because even in veganism, for example, if you are producing agriculture,
mm,
in agriculture, many of the snakes and
yeah,
everything
yeah,
else
yeah,
also, yeah, is
yeah.
killed. So you cannot survive if you decide not to kill anyone at all.
Mm,
Veganism is about minimizing that suffering, and it's especially related to the ethics of treating animals as commodities when
mm,
animals are not commodities, or industrialization of animals. Like, for
mm,
example, cows are considered as commodities, pigs are considered as commodities, and they are kept in chambers for their entire life, dark rooms,
mm,
where they are just forced to reproduce and reproduce and reproduce. And when they are, they cannot reproduce anymore, then they are sent
mm,
forward to the meat industry. So that is what
mm.
veganism is about, the ethics of veganism. So minimizing the suffering
Oh,
is what
okay.
veganism deals with. Yeah. So it's not about non-violence or something. It's not a religious thing.
Mm.
So if a mosquito
Oh, okay.
bites me, I'm
I
definitely going to kill
misunderstood
him.
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing because I always think like, okay, it's about not killing. Then we can't we can't do anything because even
Yeah.
in that case, like virus can't be kill. Okay,
Exactly.
virus is like maybe non-living thing. We can say that, but again, it's so confusing for me in that case. But okay, so minimizing the suffering, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
In that case, what about like broiler, like what is like chicken? I mean, in that
Like
case.
eating chicken, yeah, that's definitely anti-vegan. If you consume dairy products, if you consume meat products, then you cannot be a vegan.
Mm,
Because even for chicken, the mass production of chicken has very, damaging consequences for the entire thing as well. On top of it, all of meat industry has a drastic impact on the climate. So that's another thing. So
mm,
consuming food that is not plant-based,
mm,
meat basically. So that has a damaging impact on the environment, because the emissions from the meat
yeah.
industry are even higher than the anthropogenic aerosols. So yeah,
Mm.
that has definitely a damaging impact.
So in that case, like well-growing crops and everything, is this
Yeah.
comparable to uh, like for animal, like for example, to produce the vegan things, uh, it also maybe create the climate like something.
So agriculture, the emissions from the agriculture are kind of minimal, because in agriculture, the only emissions that comes in is from the tractors or any of the
Mm,
instruments that you use in agriculture, or from the animals, cattle, basically.
yeah.
But what happens is when you are trying to consume the cattle, you overproduce them. And when you overproduce the cattle, like for example, cows and pigs and chicken,
Mm,
that leads to increase in emissions. So in that case, meat industry, dairy industry is heavily responsible for increasing the emissions. And the
mm,
reason for that being people are eating more and more meat. And so that is why it's contributing to,
mm,
higher emissions,
yeah.
which are even higher now than anthropogenic aerosols. So
Mm,
there is an entire video by TED. The title of the video is "What if everyone became a vegetarian?"
mm, mm,
So they explain that, in fact, there is astounding research on this subject,
mm,
where repeatedly people and scientists all over the world, which are related to the global climate and stuff, they are saying that it is required of humans now to switch to a more plant-based diet so that it wouldn't
mm,
have a drastic impact on the environment. Because now, the emissions are very high,
mm,
and they are specifically coming from meat industry, agriculture, and all that stuff.
mm. Okay, I think we went to another thing, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
this is also fascinating because
yeah.
for me, like it's confusing question as well because and okay, do you hate like non-vegetarian or non-vegan?
No, 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 not at all. So, I don't care what people eat, but I
Yeah.
still try to explore the ethical base of what these people believe.
Mm,
Because
yeah.
what happens is, let's say you meet a person who says that, no, no, I eat chicken.
Hmm.
or I eat fish, or I eat
Like
pork,
me.
beef. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But if you ask the same person, would it be okay for you to torture an animal? So that creates a
Mm,
contradiction because they would say, no, no, no,
yeah,
torturing an
yeah.
animal is bad. But at the same time, people don't realize that slaughtering an animal is, in fact, a
Same
torture.
person. Yeah,
Yeah. So that creates an ethical contradiction.
yeah.
And I try to explore the ethics, like try to reason through
Mm,
them. That if you find this contradictory, why don't you find this contradictory? Like, where is the
mm,
cognitive bias coming
mm,
from? But yeah, I don't hate like non-vegans in general. It's usually the reverse because people, when they think veganism is trying to impose something, that's not at all the case. What they're trying to talk or
yeah.
get through a point that it minimizes suffering, and that is what the point is.
But okay, yeah, it's just like fun thing. But again, eh, for example, sometimes should I be guilty about eating chicken? The question raised in my inside me, and then I realized, okay, maybe I should not think that much as well because what's the difference, right? But again, there is this question
Yeah.
constantly raising as well, right? The
Yeah, yeah.
guilt
So
part.
definitely, exactly. Yeah. So definitely, if you think torturing an animal or killing an animal or killing anyone in general for a culinary pleasure,
Mm,
if you think that is not justifiable, then
mm,
in that case, what you're doing is also not justifiable. So I always ask this one question:
mm,
um, what is that property that animals possess, such
mm,
that if humans possessed that property, it would justify killing humans and buying their corpses from food stores? So what is the
mm,
difference? What is the differential property between animals that makes you kill them and buy their corpses in the food store? And in that case, if humans possessed that property, would you kill humans and buy corpses of humans in the food stores? So why do you
mm.
think this is wrong, but this is not wrong?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's well true. But again we can cycle back to killing mosquito as well in that case. But then okay, mosquito is harming us, then I am killing mosquito, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's also
I
about
don't think.
overproduction. Like for example, the chicken, to meet the increasing demand for chicken,
Mhm.
we are overproducing it beyond what the natural capacity is.
Mm,
So it's not like they are growing that much naturally. Like the
mm,
population is not developing that much naturally. We are
mm.
artificially increasing their population,
Increasing, yeah, yeah.
and then we are subjecting them to pain and murder and killing them. So it's like we
Mm.
are growing them so that we can kill and eat them.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's for sure.
yeah.
Like even in like that broiler chicken, it
Hmm.
it has no life in that way, right? It just created
Hmm.
in some like lab or something like that. Then it keeps grow. Yeah,
Mhm.
this is just a like thought experiment, I would say, because
Yeah.
it's not about the topic. So I just want to go to the religious text,
Hmm.
right? Not
Yeah.
deep dive into this because I have this question: why people are so much obsessed to prove that religious texts are scientific one? Because
Hmm.
I don't think this makes sense at all, so
Yeah.
what is this obsession?
Yeah. I think people are trying to make their beliefs still relevant, and they think
Hmm.
that the only way to make that relevant is to show that scientific texts are sorry, religious texts are scientific as well. Um, I myself tell people, so many people, that you don't need that. You don't need to prove that religious texts are scientific. They're not even within the domain of science. There is not one text in any religion that you would find is actually scientific as such. There might be some proposition in some texts, like for example, Vaisheshika Sutra, which is not exactly a religious scripture. It's a scripture in philosophy of Hinduism, which is Nyaya Darshana. But the propositions made in Vaisheshika Sutra are very similar to the laws of motion. And this is even mentioned in the translation of Vaisheshika Sutra by Oxford University Press, by scholars, because Vaisheshika Sutra is more like a philosophical text than it is a religious text. But if you try to say that Bhagavad Gita is scientific, or Quran is scientific, or the Bible is
Yeah.
scientific, then that's obviously that's going to be nonsense. Because the very authors that created these texts, they did not have science in their mind. They were not trying
Mm.
to create scientific texts. They were trying to create texts that would talk about ethics and norms and theology and stuff.
Yeah, even in that case, like it can't taste the time, right? Because the text, whichever written in that context or maybe in that world,
Mm.
like where human beings are not fully evolved or something like that. So it
Yeah.
can be changed and it can be completely opposite in this scenario, right? Because right now,
Mhm.
even I myself call as Hindu, maybe I have not read all the text and everything, right?
Yeah.
So so even the text written now, even they are like scientific, they can be untrue in future, right? So
Yeah.
that can be the possibility. So I don't think there is point to point to make this religious text as a scientific or pose that
Exactly.
level, right? Yeah,
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Even I tell many people that you don't need to, drag science into religious
yeah, yeah, yeah.
texts. Try to understand the philosophy that religious texts are talking about. Like
Mhm.
if you read Rigved, for example, Rigved are more like poems.
Yeah.
They were composed by, bardic families, Vedic poets. And Rigved itself gives the names of these families, in its
Mhm.
suktas.
Mhm.
So it talks about, nature of their deities, like what is Agni. So people think that Agni is fire god. But for the Rigvedic poets, it is not just a fire god. Agni is also described as Vaishvanara, the cosmic man, the one who watches over everything. And therefore, Surya is also Agni. And then we have the concept of Indra, which is considered to be the god of thunder. But then Indra is also given, like a philosopher image, in the Rigveda, because he sings the songs to rescue the sheep, which are trapped,
Mhm.
in a cave or something by, some, a demon. So even the attributes of these deities, Vedic deities, was very fluid, and they had multiple, meanings. Ushas, for example, was a Rigvedic deity. So Ushas is basically a goddess, but then Ushas means the first light of the dawn, the light that we see around the twilight. So that is called Ushas. So when the Vedic poets saw that light, they knew when to begin their rituals. So Ushas, they described Ushas as a deity, who wears gold ornaments, and then she rises from the mountains. She's all immortal, and every Ushas reminds them of their mortality. Like every rising sun reminds them of their, they are going to die one day.
Mhm.
But they considered that particular thing as a deity. So it's not like rigid, fixed deities, but more like fluid deities, and meanings, that are, that vary as per the context. So as I
Mhm.
said, Agni, there are different types of Agni. Agni Vaishwanara, Agni Jadavedas. Then we have, Ushas, which has an alternative meaning. Agni is also considered to be the appetitive nature of consciousness. So the reason for that being, just like our consciousness consumes everything that it touches, similarly, Agni consumes everything that it touches. So that's why Agni was also
Oh.
equated to the appetitive nature of consciousness.
So
So
it's
yeah.
kind of, it sounds like interpretive, right? Later on, so what I believe is like if we consider the religious text as like a piece of art, for example, right?
Hmm.
Then art can, what I believe is like art is perception and the interpretation. It's not about
Yeah.
like I think so because I do movie
Yeah.
reviews, right? And when I do reviews, like when I see and then I perceive it, I have few maybe my reference, my biases, and I conclude that and everything in my mind, and then I interpret it and I publish it, right?
Hmm.
So that's the thing. So interpretation can go anywhere, right? That's also
Definitely.
thing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So rather, if you consider, it's not, it would definitely be counted as art as well, but because it's poetry. So
Hmm.
it would definitely come under art, but then it's also philosophy in there. Like for example, if you
Yeah.
see Hiranyagarbha Sukta, Purusha Sukta, or if you go into Upanishads are all about discussions. So you
Hmm.
have Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, then you have Chandogya Upanishad. So in Chandogya Upanishad, they are talking about the concept of Atmana and Brahma. And they are saying that Atmana is the Brahma, that what is, the self is the totality of all existence. And now that thought slightly resonates with what Carl Sagan says, that we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. We are stars of contemplating the stars. So that is very similar idea that is expressed in the Upanishads. It talks about macrocosm and, microcosm. The self is the microcosm, and the totality of all existence, that's the macrocosm. So we find these things in many other religions and cultures as well. So they're essentially talking about philosophy, how they perceived nature, how they understood the nature, what were their subjective experiences.
Mm.
So yeah, that's it's all about that. And
Again, in that case, like subjective experience can be falsifiable and it cannot be true as
yeah,
well, right? So this whole thing, like we need to consider, I think, from the every aspect of things, right? Because
yeah.
it has been written in that way and in that past, so it can be go anywhere, right? So that's the thing. Even that's the bad thing about religions. Religions itself not, but I think religious people may,
Mhm.
interpret it, or maybe I don't know, like there is something wrong in that way as well.
Oh,
Because
even for interpretation, like
yeah.
if you consider the traditional thing, like let's say the
Mm-hmm.
Vedas. So the Vedas are poetry, but the
Mm-hmm.
Brahmanas are the things that provide, like Brahmanas are texts. We have Vedic Samhita, then we have Aranyaka, and then we have Brahmana. So Brahmanas are the texts that provide interpretation of rituals that are mentioned in, for example, Yajurveda, or yeah, for example, Samaveda. So Brahmanas are the texts that deal with interpretations. But then even after Brahmanas, we have Upanishads, which have
Mm-hmm.
intellectual discussions about what is being talked about. How do you interpret that? And then in the six schools of Hindu philosophy, we have Purva Mimamsa. Mimamsa itself means exegesis. Like, how do you interpret the word of the Vedas? How do you interpret the word and say what rituals one should perform? What is the perfect method to perform the rituals? And what do the rituals mean? So this all comes under exegesis. And even within the traditional line, there is a way to interpret things. You have to consider six limbs of the Ved. So there are six organs of the Ved called as Shadanga. So
Mm-hmm.
the first one is grammar, which is that is called Nirukta. Sorry, grammar is called Vyakarana.
Yeah,
So
correct.
every language has a grammar associated with it. So if you mess up the grammar, the meaning changes.
Yeah.
So you have to pay attention to grammar. Then we have etymology, like the source or the meaning of the word. That is called
Mm.
Nirukta, what the word itself means in a particular context and independently. So that is Nirukta. Then we have Shiksha, which is phonetics, utterance of a particular letter or a particular word. If you pronounce it differently, then the other person might perceive it differently. Like some words are very close, but they mean different things. Even in English, we see that if you pronounce the word differently, it means something else. So yeah, Shiksha, phonetics. That's the third one. And then we Vyakarana, Nirukta, Shiksha. Then we have Kalpa, which is how to perform the rituals. Then we have Jyotish, which is mathematics and astronomy and astrology. So a lot of mathematical facts, by the way, which were discovered later in ancient Greece, they were already present in for example, Yajurveda or Sulba Sutras. How to construct a perfect square fire altar. The procedure for that involved knowing the Pythagoras theorem, which later came to be known as Pythagoras theorem. That theorem is mentioned in Shilpa Sutras. It's so yeah, it was also mathematics
So
in that case.
it can be cited, right? I can show that
Yeah,
on here.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Mhm.
So in this way, even the interpretation itself cannot be just anything. It has to follow a traditional approach, and there is a very methodical approach, liturgy that you need to follow to interpret something within the Vedic tradition.
So there is also another thing, like people often discard the Western people interpreting the Eastern philosophy or Eastern religious
Hmm.
text, right? But and
Yeah.
one of in your podcast you said like no, because if they follow the academic discipline, then it
Hmm.
it should not be disregarded in that way or
Yeah.
something like that. So what
Yeah.
is this like? Why people
Yeah.
maybe it is? I can understand that because even like for example, like by staying here long enough in Japan, maybe if I start to interpret their culture, maybe I have that I could I may have like I can be wrong about that, right? So
Yeah.
that's true as well. But again, if the
Yeah. Yeah.
academic discipline is right, then yeah.
Yeah. So basically, there are two things. One is called ethic, and the other is called emic.
Mhm.
So ethic is what the practitioner believes about their tradition, and
Mhm.
it is internal to the tradition. Like what the
Mhm.
practitioner of that religion believes about that religion and how he studies the religion, which is the traditional path. That is called ethic. Emic is an external observer who observes the religious tradition. So what academics follows, like religious academia. Religious studies follows the emic approach, whereas the practitioner follows the etic approach. So what the religion means for a practitioner and what the religion means for an academic. These two are different points of view. So that's why people reject the Western, not necessarily Western, the academic point of view, because it is not rooted in the tradition or traditional approach. It's trying to study the religion as an observer, not as a practitioner. So that's why they reject their interpretations, because it is possible that their interpretations might not be consistent with the traditional perspective.
Mm, mm,
Like, for example, I'll give you an example. In the academic approach, um, none of the academics actually believe in the Ved as authoritative. They don't
yeah.
believe that Veds are necessarily true or axiomatic. But
Mm,
a traditional scholar who is interpreting the Veds within that tradition, for him, the Veds are absolutely true. And anything
yeah.
that follows from the Ved needs to be interpreted. So for an academic, he understands this importance that for a traditional person, Ved are true. But the academic itself would not consider Ved as true. So they could
Mm,
start providing critique of the Ved. Well, critique is not always destructive, it's also constructive. Like, Yajurved comes
yeah.
under after
Yeah.
Rigved. So for a traditional scholar, he wouldn't accept this. He would say all Veds were
Mm,
composed at the
mm,
same time. But clearly, academia says that no, that's not the case. Rigved is older than Yajurved because linguistic analysis says so. So yeah, these
mm,
two approaches is what the mode of conflict is.
mm. Yeah. So I think you always get accused of that as well, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, because I incline more towards the academic perspective.
Yeah, yeah.
Since I'm an
Ye-
agnostic, I'm not a practitioner. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So that's also the case. Yeah. So I think we cover up lots of things, I
Okay.
think. I think so, but there are few things there are bound or anything on the option just text me. Yeah. So there is another question like what why atheist or maybe even I think Alex O'Connor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So people like him or I've seen like other people also say that why they despise the formalized thing. For example, if you start to say like the existence of like evidence, like it's like as and like when you
Yeah.
give this kind of explanation, people despise that, or maybe you know in real life we don't do this kind of thing. Why philosophers keep trying to do and justify their belief? So their counter is like that, right? Recently I've seen
Yeah.
the Alex O'Connor video
Yeah.
as well. Then he was saying when people come like this saying E and S and Q. Even Dawkins with the Dawkins podcast with Alex, I think same podcast, like he was like, I don't have time with William Craig argument because he says like E and Q and whatever. So
Yeah.
why these people despise or discard this thing like formalized
Yeah.
way of like when philosopher tries to
Exactly.
explain everything. Yeah.
Yeah, so the thing that you're talking about is called analytic philosophy. So it
Mm,
begins with Russell and Frege and Wittgenstein.
mm,
So the reason for that being, they say that these propositional things like propositional logic, if P then Q,
mm,
P hence Q. So people don't talk that normally. You won't find this people talking in this way.
mm,
But it's not actually how people talk. Um, Propositional logic is the structure of reasoning itself. It's not something that academia has invented out of nowhere and it only academia follows. So, for example, I also gave an
mm.
example. Let's say you carry a bottle to the office, a water bottle, and you go
Oh
to the
yeah.
office, you drink water from the
Mm,
bottle every day. And while coming back, um, you sit in your car and you directly reach home. And then after you reach home, you open your bag and you don't see the bottle. So from this, you conclude that, okay, either my bottle is in the car or I forgot it in my office. So you go below again in your parking and you open your car, the bottle is not there. So from this, you infer that in that case, my bottle is in the office because I never got outside the car while coming from office to home. So what you have used here is itself propositional logic. What you have done essentially
mm,
is
yeah.
either the bottle is in the car or it is in the office. It is not in the car, therefore it is in the office. So this inference rule that you applied, this itself is called this is called disjunctive syllogism in propositional terms. So it's not something
Mm,
new that academics have invented. This is the structure of reasoning itself.
yeah. By observing the phenomena, they derive These all
Yeah.
this thing, right?
So,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
propositional logic is very much a part of language itself. So, for example,
Mm,
when I say disjunction, people think that it's a huge word. Well, no, disjunction just means A or B. Either you're a boy or
mm,
a girl. Either Taylor Swift is the best singer or Vladimir Putin is the best president. So,
mm,
every time a statement has or in it, it's called a disjunction. Every time a
mm,
statement has and in it, like, John is good looking and John is smart. So this is called a conjunction. Then when you
mm,
say, if this is the case, then that is the case. So this is called a conditional. Like, if it is an
mm,
animal, sorry, if it is a dog, then it is an animal. So this is conditional. Like if it is a dog, then it necessarily must be an animal. So
mm.
this is called a conditional statement. If P, then Q. And there
Yeah.
are also biconditional. Like, you are Hindu if and only if you subscribe to the religion of Hinduism. So this if and only if, this is called a biconditional. That if
Mm,
this happens, and if this happens, this happens. So yeah, this is called biconditional. So these are the five operators that are
mm,
four operators, and the last one is negation. Like, John is not good looking. So you're negating the proposition John is good looking. So that's called a negation. So these five operators are very much rooted in language itself. We use those
mm,
operators each and every day.
yeah.
So that's where propositional logic comes from. And then you can prove formal validity, like, there are proofs in natural deduction that you can apply to arguments. And that's the whole domain of propositional logic. Then we go one
Mm,
step above that, which is called first order logic. So, for example, statements like all men are mortal. So, this all quantifier that shows up, it's talking about all men that exist in the world, past, present, and future. So,
mm,
this would be a proposition in first order logic because it has a quantifier that is all. But if you say some men are good, so the some keyword is again a quantifier. So this is first order logic. And then we have modal logic. When you say that this is necessary, this is contingent, this is possible. So all of these keywords, you would need a different logical system, which is modal logic. But all of this is essentially a part of language itself, and we use them every day. So that is what logic is. It is the structure of reasoning itself. So you cannot say it is, it's not rooted in colloquial, it's just
mm,
academic. No, that's not at all the case. Every day
yeah.
people use that, they just don't know that it is propositional logic.
Yeah. Again, yeah, that by observing the phenomena and in
Yeah,
that way they derive the this formal thing,
yeah,
right? Yeah, yeah. No, like even in your debate with Bimo, like these things back and forth happened, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I subscribed him as well, and I keep watching his post. They are relevant as well. I don't have problem with that. Even in that debate, it was like it was good debate, but it interrupted in between or something like that because
yeah,
I don't know, like I think this time was not sufficient. Otherwise, it could have been good enough debate, right? But another debate
yeah,
I watched your with Science with Adira. Maybe that was the
yeah.
debate. Yeah.
But
So in
yeah,
that
it's not
debate,
even about the debate. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I think in that case, I realized like that debate was like little bit difficult to
Hmm.
understand, not understand, but it was going anywhere. I think so. That debate was like
Yeah,
a bit.
yeah.
I think your screen is freeze or something.
Oh, yeah, hold on. Okay, now
Okay.
it's back.
Okay. Yeah. So that debate was like a little bit difficult to watch, and things get keep interrupting, and that was. But with
Yeah,
Bimo, it was very interesting. I at that time was as well like I just came back from my work, and then I sleep, and I just keep
yeah,
listening that debate. So that was good one.
yeah.
Yesterday there that one podcast also very good one.
Mm,
So I
yeah,
think
on evidence. Yeah.
yeah, it's all about career. I keep watching him as well. So he
Hmm.
conduct very good podcast, and that was good. I think it's long enough, and I
Yeah,
there are few questions I raise, and again, I'm not like very familiar with this philosophy, but by your post and some of others stuff, I think okay, these things can be understand, and we can
yeah, yeah,
derive something about even the existence, life itself. So yeah,
yeah.
so it's
Definitely.
good enough. So
Rather,
there are few, yeah. Sorry,
yeah,
continue.
rather I'm going to start a YouTube channel in which I'm
Oh
going
yeah,
to
yeah.
explain philosophy and stuff. Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah. It's, okay, when when will you start this one?
Oh, so right now I'm kind of so I'm since I'm doing a PhD, I get kind
Mm,
of engaged in experimental research and grad courses. So I don't find enough time to dedicate to YouTube channel in the middle of the quarter. But I think like I've shot the first video, but I'm stuck in the editing and stuff. So soon I'll release the first video. It's going to be about introduction to logic. So yeah,
mm,
that's the first video and introduction to evidence and introduction to Indian philosophy. So three
mm.
videos I've shot, but I'm still editing them.
Oh, okay. That's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice. Because you have one YouTube channel as well, right? Project Satyalok
Yeah, that was
before.
like a team effort where we talked about, academic
Uh,
references pertaining to Indian history and,
mm,
philosophy in general.
mm. So there are few questions for like this is only for
Yeah,
like personal question. Not it's a public thing, but personal question. Like I
yeah.
wonder how you manage time to read all these, religious text and philosophy text and all this, citation and everything, all research paper. So I'm curious about that as well.
Yeah, yeah. So the thing is, when I was in India, I was always an ardent reader of books. So I wanted to, give UPSC examination. So I was either way preparing for history and religious studies and logic, and that is where I was introduced to this. But when I came to the US, I started teaching in the departments. Like for example, I have taught in the Department of Religious Studies and Philosophy, and I'm the teaching assistant there. So in that, we also have to go through multiple readings, like academic texts and references, and then we have to teach it. And that would be a part of my job itself as a teaching assistant. So even during that job duties, I get to read a lot of stuff. So that's how I'm equally well read in philosophy and religious studies, while at the same time being an aerospace student. So
Mm,
yeah,
yeah.
that's how I can manage the time.
Again, that's the point. Like managing like aerospace, like your own subject,
Yeah,
and then as
yeah,
a religious text and philosophy, it's kind of difficult. And the time,
yeah.
I think, because even I'm here, like I'm pursuing my masters, and again, the
Mhm.
time is so hard for me, right? So
Definitely,
yeah.
yeah. I have one habit that I mean, anyone can follow it. I read at least 10 pages before going to bed. Like every night, I read one
Oh,
book, but at least 10 pages of any book. It can be any book. So if you follow this habit, like within a month, you have read 300 pages. So that's like reading one book in 1 month.
yeah,
So
problem
that's,
with that
yeah.
is like, yeah, that's the best thing to do. But again, the
Yeah.
problem with that is like to grasp the philosophy thing, even
Mm.
in the 10 page, it's too hard, right? So that's the
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Yeah. Now, since I have read a lot, so I'm used to
So
what they're
yeah,
talking about. So yeah, I can immediately understand it. Okay, he's referring to this thing.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
like for the starter, it's hard because again, I think you
Mm.
and Jain Lucknowi, you are talking about this. The philosophy is the subject of jargon and everything, and I can
Yeah.
understand that because whenever I see one word, then I have to go to Google to know about that word, and then again coming back. So it's a bit difficult, but yeah, I really admire that one because again, it's to buy book is one thing, to read is
Yeah.
another thing, and to understand is the another thing,
Yeah.
right? So it's a completely different thing as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, reading is a bit tricky there.
Exactly. Yeah. Active and passive reading. Yeah.
Yeah. So because I've also tried this Alex Rosenberg, I think philosophy of
Hmm.
science. I browse few pages and then I keep selecting all these and pasting to the chat GPT and then try to
Yeah.
understand these things. Yeah, it takes time, but yeah, I also did that. And another question is again, have you disclosed your like political belief in that way? Any
No, not really. So I'm actually not at all political. I'm apolitical. Like I don't really care what happens politically. So even
yeah,
political
but
philosophy is very removed from what actually happens in politics.
yeah, but even if you like, for example, you share some meme about like Narendra Modi or maybe
Yeah,
Rahul
yeah.
Gandhi sometimes, but it seems like the fun of Rahul Gandhi and something like that. So maybe a little flicker of the
Oh yeah.
political
So there
aspect of
is
yours.
one thing. Yeah, definitely. So there is one thing that I don't consider. For example, um, regarding nationalism and liberalism. So I do
Hmm.
have some political views about that. I don't think nationalism is always bad, and I don't think liberalism is always good. Rather secularism as well. So I also try to read about that, that when can secularism be justified, when can nationalism be justified. So I also read stuff about that and try to relate that to India's politics. And then India has a whole different thing because there's caste politics in there as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that even complicates things because other countries might not have this politics, they have race politics. Like
Yeah.
in the US, there is black and white and Asian and,
Yes, yes.
open borders, closed borders. US is a very liberal country. But in India, it's much more rigid than that because it's about caste politics and there are like 2000 plus castes.
Yeah.
So how you can use that to your advantage and how people indirectly use it to gain votes. So that is what I'm more interested in. But
Mm.
it's simply all superficial. So I try to
Mm.
see it from an academic lens that okay, he's doing this to gain votes in this particular state. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I think uh, everything is in a way political, right? But
yeah,
even if we say like we are apolitical, but we have that one belief as well.
yeah,
But
yeah.
again, because what I think is like because of your little bit disclosure of that kind of stuff, your
Hmm.
academic backing those posts gets contaminated. I think so because
Yeah. Hmm.
people think maybe this person is like something bigoted or something like that. I've seen your
Hmm.
comment section and
Yeah, yeah,
people,
definitely. They keep
yeah.
on labeling me as Islam. The thing is, I always try to provide a philosophical critique of Islam. I try to
Mm-hmm.
challenge the eschatology of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
But even doing so, people think I'm being Islamophobic, which is a very strange thing because there are critiques of Islam that are very much given within the religion itself.
Yeah.
Or in other cases, when I try to talk about Varna and Jati, then people
Yeah.
think I'm being a casteist.
Mm-hmm.
And then people just start labeling me. So I just, to troll them, I take that sarcasm to extreme.
Mm-hmm.
I will definitely, for example, Aryabhatta, he was an astronomer. I could have
Yeah.
just easily said Aryabhatta is a Hindu astronomer. I deliberately say Aryabhatta was a Hindu Brahmin astronomer, since they're either way labeling me a casteist, just like a trigger point or something for them. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? Because sometimes it get contaminated because of the political
Mm,
belief, even if it's true. So
mm,
that's another thing. I've seen this one.
yeah,
And yeah, this is tricky. Political thing is very, very tricky because people can go
yeah.
like very vicious. I mean, they can be very vicious in that way. I
Mm.
think so. Yeah.
Yeah, rather the
But
thing is, since I'm staying in the
yeah.
US, I'm either way going to, I'm trying to, I'm going to be staying in the US forever. Like I want to be a citizen of the US.
Hmm.
So I would either way be removed from the politics of India in like the near future. And even when I was in India, I was not really interested in politics. But when
Hmm.
politics comes into question with religion, that is where the dispute is. And it's there's also a treatise on that called as the political theological problem. Like
Hmm.
politics will always be in dispute with religion, where one party uses religion for their benefit and
Oh
the other
yeah.
party
Hmm.
needs to criticize that religion to gain political power. So that the same happens in the US. So even the US has the right wing, which is more favored towards Christianity, Christian
Christianity.
nationalism. Yeah, because in US majority are Christians.
Yeah.
So yeah, this would be present in almost all the major
Yeah.
democracies in the world.
Again, I think so. I don't know. I'm not sure, but US, public domain like public platform or any social media platform are, I think, it dominated by right wing right now because
Yeah.
all thing this I was them all, right. I was this Ben Shapiro and Michael
Hmm.
Knowles and this kind
Yeah.
those rabbit hole as well, and then again I was this other liberal stuff. But
Hmm.
I think they are dominated. I sorry, they
Yeah.
are dominating in social media platform. They keep
Yeah.
thinking or something like that. Yeah, yeah. In USA, but I can say that like US is very much vibrant democracy. I can say that because
Yeah.
comedian can make fun of anything they don't oppose, right? So freedom of speech is very, very good there. I think so because
Yeah.
in
Definitely. Yeah.
even in Nepal or maybe India, I don't know. In Nepal, one person if joke about anything, flicker of any, the comment of any community,
Hmm.
he or she can go jail, right? So that kind of
Oh.
stuff happened. Yeah.
Mm.
Recently, one comedian make fun of one, community,
Yeah.
and he went to jail.
Hmm.
But it was such a it's so hard for him, bad. So even in India, I keep listening that
Yeah,
kind of thing. So yeah, in that way, US is like very open to do that. And even you have given this one example of their freedom about this one, I think Christian school, sorry, Christian
yeah,
university, they are discriminating black people, but even
yeah.
they right.
Exactly, yeah. So it's like freedom of religion from both sides. Like,
Yeah.
because there are 14, I guess it is the 14th Amendment or is it the Fourth Amendment, like one of the amendments. So
Mm.
it says that Congress neither has the right to establish the laws of any religion, nor restrict practicing those religions or
Oh.
prohibit the practice of those religions. So that's
Mm.
why it's truly secular.
Mm.
So somehow that is not really followed in India or the more like Eastern countries like China, for example. China is not trying to reclaim its heritage of Taoism and Confucianism and stuff. So yeah, it's always going to happen that religion would come into conflict with politics and it would influence politics, and then politics also influences religion. And it
Yeah.
has been happening since a long time. Like even if you consider history, when kings used to fund Buddhists or Jains in India, then their monasteries were built, and in their texts themselves, kings were portrayed as heroes and stuff. So
Oh.
this dispute between
Oh.
religion and politics goes back. Yeah,
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting for me. Okay, so they
yeah,
used to say that king is something, beyond. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
definitely. Yeah.
Ah.
And the kings who did not fund them, like for example, let's say the king
Oh, yeah.
refuses to fund Buddhists and Jains, they were portrayed as villainous and
Mm.
evil or someone wrong. So yeah, that is how religion influences politics and politics influences religion.
Mm. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
quite interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, I think now it's we can end this, but this is a wonderful
Okay.
conversation. I really admire your work, and yeah, I think the academic stuff is good to
Yeah.
to post and to get educated as well, because I think uh the world is like a bit different now, because
Yeah.
everyone wants attention, and for that attention they can use any sort of thing, right? E-
Exactly.
Either they use religion as well or political belief. So
Yeah.
I think best way to learn things maybe to read, and I believe that people don't read right now. I don't think
Exactly.
like many people read, because it's so hard
Yeah.
to read. People don't
Yeah.
understand this. It's so hard. I don't think people read that much nowadays,
Exactly.
right?
Especially with phones and tablets with screen time, people have almost,
Yeah,
books have become almost obsolete now. Like maybe in the
yeah,
next 10 years, books would be completely obsolete and, we'll just focus on screens. But I'm still trying to get the old tradition back, like,
yeah.
reading books, pages.
No, people buy books. That's one thing.
Hmm.
Out of
Yeah.
hobby, but they don't read. I
Yeah.
think
They
so.
don't read it. Yeah.
Yeah, it keeps happening that as well. No, same goes to me as well. Okay, okay, let's scroll some reel. So I
Hmm.
deliberately uninstall the app all the time. Like last
Hmm.
3 months, I didn't install in my phone. Then I just have to. If I need to watch, then I open from the desktop only. So I do
Hmm.
this
Yeah.
constantly. But again,
Okay.
it is difficult to read, and people don't read,
Yeah.
and even citation to cross check. This is this is beyond lots of people's mind, but yeah,
Yeah.
whatever you are doing, it's great. And yeah, have you talked with Asana Bhattacharya?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So she also follows my personal page, like Agnostic
Yeah,
Hindu, and I also follow
yeah.
her. And so once what happened is in our university, a Vajracharya priest was actually invited in a course on Buddhism to
Oh,
conduct a ritual in class. And it happened so that that Vajracharya priest was actually her relative
oh.
from Nepal, yeah, who has now settled in the US. So
Mm.
in that case, yeah, definitely. So she
Oh,
keeps on liking my stories, some of
yeah.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, she's quite popular, and she's very good communicator. She communicates very
Mm,
well. She hosts the
yeah.
show, sports show, and travel. So she's quite famous, and yeah, she's
Yeah.
amazing. And okay, so last I want you to recommend few books, because people wants recommendation, but then they don't read. But still, why don't, right?
Yeah, definitely. So if people want to read about Indian philosophy, I would recommend the book History of Indian Philosophy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, by Surendranath Dasgupta. So that's a very wonderful book. It covers everything about Indian philosophy in 5 volumes. So that is the one book. The second book, if you want to read about Hinduism itself, only Hinduism, then there is a wonderful book called Introduction to Hinduism by Gavin Flood, and it's by Oxford University Press. So that's the second book. If you want to read about Buddhism, then I would suggest Introduction to Buddhism by Peter Harvey. It is published by Cambridge University Press. So these three books would give you a fair idea of Hinduism, Buddhism, and history of Indian philosophy. And then these are secondary references. Like these are things that scholars say about that religion, and introductory books, basically. So after reading these three books, you can dive into the primary references themselves, like directly reading the texts, like Upanishads, Rigved, or Darshana texts. So yeah, but I think these three books a person can definitely read. And apart from that, if you want to read generally about Western philosophy, then there's a very interesting book called History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell himself was a very famous philosopher. He was a logician. So that's one book that you can read to learn about Western philosophy. So yeah, these are the some of the books that I would recommend. Like I guess I recommended 4 books. Yeah.
Gosh. So do you watch movies? Movies?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So are there any movies that you want to recommend?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So there is a really interesting movie relating to this topic called as I
Hmm.
Origins.
I
So
Origins.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
I Origins. I guess it was in 2014, and it talks about it is about reincarnation, but
Hmm.
very interesting perspective. So I Origins is one movie which is directly related to the topic. The second, so I also watch science fiction movies like Interstellar, Knowing.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah,
That's amazing. Nolan
yeah.
does all the time and he's great at it. Yeah.
Exactly. The one movie that inspired me to become an aerospace engineer to pursue a career in space and stuff. So the name of that movie is October Sky, and it's a very old movie. So I guess
Oh.
it's Jake Gyllenhaal is the lead actor in that.
Oh. Hmm.
Yeah, and it's a
I
very old
know
movie,
he's
and
a
it's
very,
based on true story.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's based on true story of Homer Hickam, who is himself a person who trains astronauts in NASA. So it's based on his life story, and it's a very interesting thing. It's based on a book called The Rocket Boys, but the
Hmm.
name of the movie is October Sky. So the word Rocket Boys is an anagram of October Sky. If you take the letters from the word October Rocket Boys, you will get the word October Sky as well. And
Oh.
October sky actually also has a meaning in astronomy that the sky during the month of October is very clear for observation. So it also
Hmm.
relates to that. So that's one movie that inspired me to pursue a career in rocket science. So I think that movie is like really good. And it's also kind of a drama and stuff. So yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Oh, that's nice. No, because this channel, basically, I do movie review as well, right? So,
okay,
and sometimes I
yeah,
do podcast because
hmm,
if I get interested to different topic, then I just
yeah.
do this one. And this is my first podcast with international person because I
Oh,
keep
yeah,
inviting, within Nepal. So, yeah, we can do this after like 6 months or maybe 1 year later
yeah,
on
sure,
again
yeah, of
in
course.
another topic and maybe then I will be also well-read person. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you enjoy. I pardon me for my language. I'm not that much good communicator. I'm still learning. So yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's totally fine.
yeah. So I'll just stop this.